Hello and welcome to Pain Unfiltered, where we go in-depth into the interventional pain and spine world with some of the top key opinion leaders and executives in the space. We are your hosts, Dr. Patrick Buchanan and Dr. Timothy Deere for this Aspen podcast. Let's get started. I'm Dr. Patrick Buchanan, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Timothy Deere. Tim, this is the last episode of season 2 as we wrap up here. What have been some of the most memorable moments of the season?
You know, Patrick, I think it's been such a fantastic season, and we've covered things ranging from, methods of spinal cord stimulation to methods of minimally invasive spine techniques to proper behavior on social media. So we've covered a gamut of things. We've covered different targets for neuromodulation, different targets for trying to really help people to lower risk and improve efficacy. So I've gotten so many great comments from around the United States, around the world, people listening in and giving me their thoughts. And we've also covered mentoring, and we've covered diversity, and a lot of the things that you and I know are so important to Aspen's growth and ISPEN's growth going forward into Europe. And so I think all of those things have been very, very important. And I think, in this last episode of the season, we're kind of covering a couple of those issues: new methods of minimally invasive spine, developing new products and how that's done, and how physicians and industry collaborate, and really recovering, I think, the new innovation mindset, which I think to me is maybe the most important thing that all of these things have in common, is that new mindset of changing things for the better. So I think it's been a great season. You've done a fantastic job. It's been my honor to be here with you this year, and I look forward already to season 3.
No, I appreciate it, Tim. We've had some great episodes, starting off with a bang with the Intercept acquisition with Dr. Ray Baker and Jim Cassidy, phenomenal hosts, guests on that. And then having your coach on, Mac Dixon. I thought that was a great one. Talk about making a better you. And then maybe one of the most important episodes was the compliance and healthcare fraud one with Ronald Chapman. So if you guys haven't heard any of those episodes, feel free to go back and listen to them as we move on to season 3. So again, we want to thank all of our sponsors out there that have supported this season, especially Mainstay Medical, Saluda Medical, Nalu Medical, Medtronic, and Spinal Simplicity. So thank you so much for all your support. And if you are interested in sponsoring season 3, just go to the Aspen Podcast website and fill out the form, and we'll definitely try to get you in there. So, Tim, we've discussed several minimally invasive surgical procedures, like you've said, this season, but one of the fastest growing therapies in our field has been sacroiliac joint fusion. I mean, if you look at 5 years ago at the Aspen conference, there may have been a couple of SI joint fusion companies out there. Now there's 30 or 40 in our space. So it's just incredible the growth that we've seen over the last couple of years. So I want to introduce our guest today that has had a lot of experience with SI joint fusion, including developing helping develop his own lateral SI joint fusion device. Dr. Usman Latif, thanks for joining us.
Welcome. Thanks, Patrick, and thanks, Tim. I'm really excited to be on here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself real quick, kind of give you my background. And first, I'll just give a disclosure that I am a consultant on the advisory board for Spinal Simplicity and have some equity there. I'm an interventional pain physician. I have an anesthesia background, but I have a little bit of a atypical, story. I started out in internal medicine. I trained at Wake Forest. I was a lot younger than my peers, maybe about 7 years younger than my peers. And so didn't really know what I wanted to do in life, and didn't even know that interventional pain existed until I met a neurologist, Dr. Shahzad Chaudhry, who went on to do interventional pain fellowship at Duke and told me all about the field. And at that time, I thought I kind of missed the boat. I ended up at Yale, was an academic hospitalist there, ended up getting my MBA during that time, was involved in some startups, which got acquired. The Pfizer Clinical Research Unit was across the street. I was an investigator for them. I was on the board of the hospital. I kind of did a lot of things trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life. And one day I was talking to my friend, Dr. Chaudhry, who was still doing interventional pain, and I decided I'm going to go for it. So I started over. I did anesthesiology at Johns Hopkins, and I did my fellowship at the Harvard MGH program. I got to work with great people, Dr. Cohen at Hopkins, and Gary Brenner, and Jim Rathmel, and Chris Gilligan at MGH, and was supposed to start a job there. And about 2 months before I was going to start it, came back to Kansas City to visit my parents, and the chairman at the University of Kansas insisted I have coffee with him and talked me into changing my trajectory. And now I've been here at the University of Kansas for just over 10 years. We are kind of a hybrid between private and academics, and we are heavily steeped in clinical studies and research. We have a great fellowship program and excellent colleagues, Dawood Syed, Andrea Chadwick, Ted Braun, Chris Lamb. There's about 10 of us, and everyone's been really great to work with. So I've been pretty fortunate to be over here.
That's great, Usman. Why don't you talk about a little bit about kind of your passion in product development and engineering and how you got involved in all this?
Yeah, so I have always had an interest in tech and been involved in a lot of different things, kind of on the data side, AI and ML solutions. I build, I have companies on the side that have built products that make warehouses run more efficiently, or we've used computer vision and machine learning to prevent catfishing and online dating. Just kind of all over the board. And then in recent years, I've started translating some of that skill set towards the interventional pain field and seeing how we can benefit patients by applying those principles here. But my dad was a PhD in electrical engineering, and since I was a kid, I've always been tinkering with things. Even right now here, upstairs I have a little lab, and we're always working on little things with my daughters and getting patents on things. And that has been really great because I've been able to translate that passion as well within this field and been involved in a lot of the products that have come to market, whether they're spinal implants or things that are electronic components or on the digital side. And so I'm fortunate enough, Spinal Simplicity's world headquarters is like 5 minutes down the road. And one thing that has been unique about them is there's a lot of companies where all of us probably on this call have gotten pulled into, take a look at this product. It's not on the market, but it's coming out soon. But it's always at the end. It's going to hit the market in like a couple months. We can give them lots of feedback and they might appreciate it, but they're not going to drastically change their product. It's too late. They're like, 6-7 years into that product cycle. And so I think what was unique here was I got to be involved right from the concept of, hey, we're thinking about getting into SI joint fusion, and that's about as far as they were. And so from the very ground up, I kind of got to think of it as somebody, coming from the approach of what would it take for me to get really excited about this product? And what do I think my colleagues care about? What would benefit patients? What are the gaps right now in the field? And they were extremely receptive. And I've been really impressed by the agility and speed of their iterative cycle. I mean, I would come up with an idea and I'd come and see them 2 days later and they already had prototypes. And I just could not believe it. I've never seen that type of speed anywhere else.
Usman, I think, a couple of things. First of all, you've been involved in stopping catfishing, the great TV show on MTV. You've been involved in stopping that is another episode altogether. We don't have time today for that.
I knew that would catch your attention.
Yeah, that was the best. That was the best thing you've done in your career, probably. It's very important. But no, joking. But I will say that Todd Mosley was here with me yesterday visiting our OR, and you said that you would make a recommendation. The engineers would kind of vet that recommendation. And I've been involved in product development my whole career, so I think you and I were either both pretty innovative or we're both kind of crazy. But my question for you is, when you talk to those engineers, I know you and I have the same mindset. I think Patrick's in that mindset. A lot of physicians out there have ideas, but they don't really know how to work and collaborate with engineers. A lot of engineers would like to have physician input, but they've never really worked with us until the project's over, as you said. Can you give us a 2 or 3 minute synopsis of the best way to approach as a physician to help an engineer, and the best way as an engineer to bring a physician in? What's some advice you would have for both those groups?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point, Tim. We always want to just like shoot for the sky and for the stars, and we're asked for all these things. And I think often we don't think through it and say what is actually involved in that, what is realistic, and then kind of also thinking about it from all the other aspects of like what goes into the production. What kind of what does impact do complexities have on the fiscal model that they're building, and all of this type of stuff. So I think what is really helpful is if you, as a physician, you think about it really thoughtfully, and rather than just saying, okay, if someone comes to you and says, hey, how can we make this product really great? Rather than just start spewing out like 100 ideas, take a moment, pause, and think, what is really the leading problem, right? So for that product, there might be 30 things that you could do to make it better. But are there like 3 or 4 or 5 things that if they could just accomplish that, that would be the most impactful? So that's, I think, one is kind of trim it down to a smaller amount of asks, and then you can explore what's reasonable. Two, you're a physician and you've been doing these things. So think through, what's the feasibility of it? Whatever it is that you're asking for, is that something that's realistic? And if it doesn't seem realistic, but it's really important, can you sit there and maybe problem solve a little bit and think, okay, if I was going to MacGyver something together, what would it look like? And how could we make it work? And then go to the next step of, and then how could we produce that at a cost that is reasonable, right? Thinking through all the stages, because it's not just about coming with a concept. You come with something really great, but if you can't scale that up, it's never going to see the market, right? And then I think one other piece is think about it too from the aspect, and this is, I think often as physicians, we go through med school and we don't think about this part of it. But at the end of the day, for anything to actually be able to enter the market and benefit our patients, it has to be financially viable. So it doesn't just mean the cost there, but physicians will be excited about this product. Payers will want to cover this product. And a lot of these things do go hand in hand, right? If the safety data is there, if the efficacy is there, but there also has to be something that kind of inspires people, right? And all of those things, if you can think about everything that you do with all those elements, it's much more likely that someone is going to run with your ideas and you're going to actually get to see them to fruition. I think as an engineer, I think approaching a physician, I think maybe part of it is just helping shepherd the physician towards those concepts, right? Trying to make sure that help them reframe things. So if they come with ideas and they're not listening, tell them why that, that probably isn't feasible. And I think giving that kind of feedback will help them give better ideas going forward. And I also think you can tailor it to different physicians based on their level of expertise. If they've done a lot of product dev, you're not going to really have to coach them much. If this is their first time, maybe start by just focusing on things like, what makes things easier for you? What's your pain points? Kind of explore their experience and then start to tease out things where they can really help you.
Oh, great insight.
Yeah, that's great advice and great insight on all that. Let's transition over to the product that you've been helping develop in sacroiliac joint fusion. Talk a little bit about how you started this, how did this come up, and kind of where you guys are at right now with it.
Sure. So, when I first got pulled into this, we kind of started thinking about, what's out there for evidence, right? What does that landscape look like? And I think people who know me know that I'm pretty driven by the evidence out there. As much as we like to be at the cutting edge, I also want to know that there's a reason we're doing it. And when we look at this particular part, lateral SI joint fusion, there's a ton of studies in that area. And a lot of them are, the ones from 08, 09, 13 that are cited repeatedly by NAS and ISAS and CNS and AANS. And these are around these HMA screws. They're basically these 10 millimeter implants that are done in the S1 corridor. And they've been really, really well studied. Very, very low complication rate. There's studies that go out as far as 40 months for follow-up. You've seen statistically significant improvements in ODI and VAS and all those, and high fusion rates around 95%. So we know that you're going out with, with one of these 510K products that you need a predicate product. And so that's been well established here. And now you have to figure out what can you do to make it better. And that's kind of where we went to look at, what are the things that go wrong in this space? Because I think this, again, went kind of my kind of giving my physician feedback on it that, we could see that there could be some advantages of SI joint patients, fusion in certain patients. But what are the things that kind of hold us from going down that approach as a physician? And so I think, it's always useful to see what does that safety profile look like. So we looked at the MOD database, and that's the manufacturer and user facility device experience database that the FDA maintains. And there, what we saw was overall relatively safe. Only 3 deaths out of this huge time span that was reported on, and none of those were product related. Those were all anesthesia related. The most common device problem, almost 50%, was malposition, and among those causes, almost 60% of them were user error. So we could see already that there's this huge opportunity here. If we can do something to make the actual process more replicable and just kind of foolproof, then you potentially can improve that piece of it. And the most common complication, really 34% of the complications, over 500 out of these 1,500 complications, were encroachment of the neural foramen. A lot of times people, what they're worried about is SGA hemorrhage, and that could be terrible. And but in fact, bleeding was like 7 out of the 1,500 events, and none of the deaths. So it's actually relatively rare. It's like less than 0.1% of the complications. The leading complication is violation of that foramen. And so that really kind of, I think, reconfigured us to say, okay, how can we design this so that is not an issue?
I think it was today I had 2 lateral approach SI fusions just this afternoon. And, I do mine under general neuromonitoring. So obviously if I encroach the foramen, I'm going to know pretty quickly. But I also find that, using the device, the Liberty device you're talking about that you involved in, as you cross that joint line, the other thing that really impressed me about the approach, you're not going very far past that joint line because of the structure of the device. Therefore, you're a long ways in relative speaking from the foramen. Was that intentional in the design to keep it far from the foramen? And how did you do that?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. So I think that is definitely one of the huge distinguishing factors of this device. It standardizes the distance that it goes past the SI joint. So the distance that it goes from the lateral edge of the sacrum and past that in the medial direction is exactly 12 millimeters. And that's going to be the same on every patient. And every patient has a different parameters and measurements of their ilium, and their sacrum, and even their SI joint gap. But it's designed in such a way where you essentially place this pin that's in there, and it has a shoulder. And so that shoulder stops just outside of the cortex of the lateral aspect of the sacrum. And then you feed the other components over that. So that then takes a measurement so it can essentially figure out how wide is their ilium. And then the implant that you put in is customized to that patient. So it exactly matches the width of their ilium. And the part that is going to go internal into the sacrum is going to enter exactly 12 millimeters. And then you deploy these wings, which then anchor it there. And I think there's a couple things there that give it some benefit. There was a good study in Scientific Reports by Thiessen in 2020 that looked at 3D bone mass distribution of the posterior pelvic ring and the role in transsacral screw improvement placement. And what they saw was that there's a lot of cancellous bone internally, but there's this really wide berth of stronger cortical bone on the sacral versus iliac side of the joint. And so, in fact, when you take your oblique view, you can see it gets a little bit like darker right on both sides of that SI joint. And that's because it's really thick, strong bone there. And so we basically thought if you can deploy wings within that bone, it's going to be the strongest point to place this device. And then if you standardize how far it goes in, you know that you have some safety parameter there. And then because the wings are deployed, the way most screws work, they stabilize the joint by just torque. So the hope is that just through torque, with these, you have 2 millimeter threads on each side. So basically with 4 millimeters of purchase, that hopefully it's going to stay put. But what we know is that even just within like 70 hours, a lot of that torque is lost in most of these implants. And so with these wings, you have 10 millimeters of purchase, so 5 millimeters on each side. And so the thought is that that will significantly improve the purchase. And so it's going to stay put. And also you're placing that close to that really thick part, strong part of that bone. So I think those were some of the innovations that kind of went into this to allow it to standardize some of these parts, really lean into the evidence that we have there on anatomy, and then also make it so that because everything is passed over the guide wire, it just makes everything safe. Everything is exactly standardized. The placement is standardized. Nothing can slip. Every device is going to go in exactly the same way, and it can be repeated by everybody. And I think when you are dealing with things that have to do with safety, the easiest thing is, rather than just telling people try not to do that, is if you can just design it so it makes it really hard to do the things you don't want people to do. And the easiest thing is just to do it the right way. That's what's going to be successful. And I think that was what went into this design.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept. You mentioned the data behind the lateral fusion with SI bone and kind of was the gold standard and has been the gold standard at the time. Can you talk a little bit about the current data and biomechanical or clinical data on this current SI joint fusion device?
Yeah, so there is biomechanical data. I think one of the things I had kind of come up with when we first were going through this device production was that it should be one implant. It's going to make it much more efficient. It's going to be much more effective, but we need to be able to prove that one implant is sufficient by placing it in a certain location. And so all the biomechanical testing was done with one implant. There's the option to put in more. If you want to put in, a second one, you can, but it received FDA approval for stability as a single implant through a lateral approach based on its biomechanical data. Now, the study that I kind of undertook earlier this year, and actually, Dr. Deere was involved in this study, Dr. Beal, Dawood Syed, Chris Lamb, Sarah Keem, Nick Wharton. We had a really great group of people who collaborated on this. And what we did was we took just a huge load of CT scans that we had in a database and started to take patients one by one and take measurements of their SI joints and determine all of those parameters. And the things that we kind of looked at was, how far is it from the outside of the ilium to the medial aspect of the ilium? How wide is that SI joint gap? How far is it from the lateral aspect of the sacrum to the lateral aspect of the S1 foramen? And then take each of those measurements also at the S2. And we went through and we started out with a pilot study. We took about 60 SI joints. And what we initially found was that the measurement that we were most concerned about was that from the lateral aspect of the sacrum to the lateral aspect of the S1 foramen, because that's the part that we were trying to standardize. And we found that the shortest distance was 15.6 millimeters. So we took, maximum and minimum and means, but at the end, what we wanted to know is, in the worst case scenario, what is the least amount of distance you're going to have to traverse to kind of get into a bad territory? So we submitted that pilot study to Aspen over the summer. It got accepted as a late breaking, and we got a really good response to it. So then we just kept working on it, and we got up to 162 joint measurements. And with that, what we found out was that minimum value kind of bottomed out and then held steady at 13.6 millimeters. And we weren't seeing anything that was lower than that. And that's actually going to be presented this weekend at ASRA. And we've continued that effort. So now actually we're over 200 joints measured. We're going to be able to present that at NANS, and we're already working on a manuscript to get this published. We'll probably add a little bit more. But I think there's going to be a lot of other interesting insights that come out of it, like, for example, like gender differences and things like that. But I think the most important thing here is that if the mean measurement there is about 21.6 millimeters. So that means in your average patient, if you're only going 12 millimeters in, you have so much more room before you're going to get to the foramen. But even in that worst case scenario, right, that one that represents 0.05% of your patients, if that's 13.6 millimeters, what that means is, even though that's obviously not the way you're going to do it, if you intentionally try to run this into the foramen, you can't. And that's a good thing, right? And that kind of goes to that design of, we want to make it foolproof. The safe corridor is actually superior to the S1 foramen. So technically, it shouldn't matter, but obviously people get in trouble when they go diagonal, or that things weren't lined up right, or they ended up a little bit lower than they need to be. And so the goal was design this in a way that that's not possible. And fortunately, this anatomic data has borne that out. And I hope that this data will help everyone that's out there, not just one company, because as physicians, we don't really care that much about the success of one company. We just want the field to succeed.
Well, let's dig into that deeper. So I think I think that study is really revolutionary, and thanks for leading that study and bringing me in. I think it was really I think important for future safety and efficacy of things we're doing. So we've had good success in our practice with the posterior approach. We've had good success with lateral oblique approach. Now we've had good success with this approach. I like that we're going above S1 in that lateral. That's a safe zone for sure. So I ask you that because I think recently there was a statement by one of the societies, NAS, that really mirrored a coding statement from one of the manufacturers, who I thought was kind of unfortunate, because now, coding now is approved if you go into the joint and transfix the joint. And, I think that was a decision that was made, and it was made in good faith. So I think we should obviously honor that at the current time. So that means you have several options now. You can do a posterior bone allograft, right? That's certainly an osteoporotic patient, for example. That's a great option, right? We can avoid transfixing the bone. You can do transfixing posteriorly. You can do lateral oblique view. You can do pure lateral in the bottom of the joint, like with 3 triangular screws, or you can do this method at S1. So that's a long, complicated introduction to this question, but I think that goes to show you the complexity of our field, right? So we have a lot of fellows and residents who listen to this podcast. They're going to be exposed to these methods. I want you to give me about a succinct summary. If you're a fellow right now and you're going to be in private practice in 6 months from now, you'll be in private practice. How do you decide which of those things to do? Because you don't want to do them all. It's going to be complicated for you. If you're going to pick 2 of those methods, what would you pick and why?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it's tough to make it succinct, but I think I'm going to take a stab at it here. Okay. what you don't want to be as a physician is someone who just is an extremist. So this is the thing that works, nothing else works, and I'm going to just do this, and it's the best. That's not the case, and evidence keeps evolving, and our field is moving very quickly, and we need to be more open than that. We do need to be grounded in evidence. So there will be some things that are not good for our patients. There are things that are going to be great for them. And I think we should just think of all of them as tools, and we need to customize our approach for every patient that comes in front of us and not just have like a simple algorithmic approach. That's what makes us better than, computers, right? In this particular case, if you think about other patients you have, maybe we do dorsal column stimulator. Then we have other patients, maybe we do DRG. And maybe we have other patients and we do peripheral nerve stimulation. We don't just say, oh no, everyone has to get DRG or everyone has to get PNS. We know that we have to be adaptable and some things will work better for different patients. And I think it's the same thing here. If I was going to pick two approaches, I think that there are definitely a lot of cases where there are advantages for doing a posterior allograft, right? It's a very easy procedure. Some patients don't want anything metallic in their body for whatever reason, right? So that could be great. It's relatively easy to do, and there's a lot of advantages to it potentially. But then there's also other cases where maybe a lateral approach is preferred, and there could be a variety of reasons why that might occur. And there are some advantages to a lateral approach. For example, you're having a smaller gap, right? Because you're actually compressing that joint. And so it's going to be easier for bone to kind of bridge that. And then you have the actual mechanical pressure there as well. Now, if I'm going to do a lateral approach, I would much rather have a device where I only have to put in one implant and I'm thereby minimizing my risk of complications. Even just by the simple fact of every time you put in something laterally, there is some risk involved. So if you only put in one, then that's less risk than if you put in two or if you put in three. And now if you have, evidence, anatomic and otherwise, to support that this device is designed in such a way that it's going to be safer than others that are out there, then I think that makes it a worthy tool to have in your tool belt. So I think the way I would just kind of shrink that down to a sentence is figure out what's out there that works and safe and it offers benefit to your patients, and then be balanced about it and make sure that you are not just getting stale and saying, I did this one thing and I'm not going to learn anything else new.
Great answer, Patrick.
Yeah, awesome answer. So, we talked about where this SI fusion space has been in over the last 5 years. Where do you think this is going in the next 5 years?
Yeah, that I think could be a pretty short answer. I don't know. I think it's hard to know. I mean, there's I think so many curveballs kind of coming in our space right now. It seems like, from Tim's setup for the last question, he basically said like every single different angle that you could come and approach this from. It seems like a lot of it has been done. So I think a lot of it will probably be focusing on the themes we've talked about here, is like making it simpler, making it more efficient, and making it safer, and making it foolproof and replicable, right? Because if we do all of those things, then we can best serve our patients. And then as we do studies, all the studies will show the same data, right? Like we want to, if you do a study and then someone else does the same study, it should show the same data, because if it doesn't, then there's something wrong here. And so I think if you can standardize these things, that is going to make the field stronger. I think from our perspective, there's already another study that we're getting off the ground that Tim is involved in too, where we're going to now map out the SGA. And we're going to look, where are all those little peripheral branches that come out of that? And can we define, based on fluoroscopy, a safe corridor to avoid those branches? Right. So I think that hope that people get inspired to continue to do more and more studies that look around safety and making things more replicable.
So Usman, I'm going to ask you my last question of this great discussion. And I'm going to tie something you said a moment ago to Patrick's question. I think you and I are going to agree on the future, because I think you know what the future is. And a lot of it you're leading with these great studies you're doing on the anatomy, on the gluteal artery anatomy, all those things that we need to find out. When that next study you just mentioned is going to be so important for safety. I just love that we're doing that and you're leading that. But you said something a moment ago. You said, we're better than computers. I heard you say that during one of your answers. And Patrick said, what's next? And I think really we may not be better than computers with some things. And one of those things is going to be navigation. So I'm going to see if you and I agree on this. I think we take the studies that you're leading right now on that anatomy. We learn from that. We have a computer learn from that. We find out where the gluteal artery usually is. We learn from that. We have a computer learn from that. And then we bring in, let's say, a strategic buys one of these companies, strategic with a lot of money, that they can do development. I think the future is, and you can certainly either agree with me or we can debate this in the last few moments of this podcast. I think the future of SI joint treatment, possibly other treatments, based on vertebral nerve ablation, other things we're doing. I think the future is going to be navigation. We've had it in other areas of medicine, and you and I have never had it. We want it, but it's never been scalable, or the anatomy has never been reproducible enough. I think it's navigation. I think computers will be smarter than us in helping lead us there. They'll still need us, thankfully. They'll still need us and our colleagues. Am I crazy, or does that sound like a reasonable future for us?
Yeah, I think I'll kind of maybe agree and build on that. So I think when I said that, we're better than computers, I think it's that I don't think computers will replace us, right? I mean, people get worried with AI and all these things like, every plane that you ever get in has autopilot, and the autopilot has gotten really, really good. But have you ever gotten on a big jet that had less than 2 pilots? That never changed, right? We still need that human intuition there and that complexity so that, yeah, 99% of the time it can maybe perform better than us, but that 1% of the time you need that human edge to kind of think about that, this doesn't fit into that. And I think it's the same thing here. I think that it can, I agree with you 100%, it can make things better, but we still need our insights to kind of add to that. And I think one other area where it's, I think, would really play a big role is going back to your last question about, how do you decide which approach to take? I think as we get more and more data about the anatomy and the complexities of it and what's safe and what's not safe and what outcomes look like and how those are dependent on, people's individual anatomies, maybe one of the next steps too will be you load up your CT scan and it says, all right, based on this joint, I actually think this person should get a lateral SI joint fusion, and they have this % chance of having a really good outcome from it. And this other patient, they need an allograft and they need a posterior approach, and maybe even giving insight of like, and the way I would put it is exactly at this spot and at this angle, and it's all based on data, right? So I think that it's not just going to be that it's going to help us while we're doing the procedure. I think it will guide us to which procedure we should do, and I think that's exciting.
Right.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, Usman. So we're wrapping up the episode here. We'll just end with kind of giving your final thoughts. Do you have any other products in development you wanted to share, and kind of go from there?
Yeah, I think that I don't have a specific thing I think to share, but I think what I will tell you is, I love PNS. I love everything kind of with neuromodulation, and I think there is still so much that can be done there. I think there is a ton that we are going to see around getting better and better at passive frictionless data collection within neuromodulation, whether it's for spinal cord stimulation or DRG or PNS, and how that will drive better outcomes. I also think that even though PNS is starting to mature, we're still really at the very early days of it. And I think there is so much infinite possibility there. And I think there's a lot of things that we're working on there. I think leads can get better. There's so many other things that we can do to expand the reach of what we can do with PNS. And it's not just going to be more targets. We're presenting on stellate ganglion stimulation, for example. Like, that's something that hasn't really been reported on before, but there's something really interesting, I think, there, and we're gonna have something at NANS around that. But it's not going to be just pain. There are so many functional improvements that we'll be able to see with PNS, and I'm not going to dive into those here, but I think we have the opportunity right now to get positioned in a place where we become the experts in this field, so that even when functional things come up, like, for example, pudendal nerve stimulation, which is one of the techniques that I've actually published on, a safe way to do that for permanent implants, it can double the likelihood that you're continent after a radical prostatectomy. So as interventional pain physicians, maybe we'll be ideally positioned to be the people who put those in. And I think as there are more and more of these types of advances coming out, I think we have this opportunity right now to become the skilled masters of that area.
Well, that's awesome. Again, thank you, Usman, for joining us. It's been great getting to know you. I thought you had one of the best presentations at the Nashville Collaborative Summit. So, keep with the innovation, keep with, contributing to this. And I think, it's only up from here. Tim, why don't you wrap us up?
Yeah, so I'll just to wrap up, I'll say thank you for coming on. And, certainly as I got to know you, you visited West Virginia a few years ago. It was great to get to know you. Now I watch you and I watch what you're doing, and you're certainly impressing me greatly. But I think you're impressing the field. But it's not about that. It's about us working together. And you're part of this community, and you're such an important scientific part of the Aspen community. So we appreciate you, and thank you for coming on. And Patrick, thanks for leading these discussions. You've chosen the guest, and I think having Dr. Latif on tonight is such a great way to finish the season, because it gives us energy for next season. It pushes us forward to what's going on. It's futuristic, and we'll hopefully have you back on season 5 or 6 to hear what these innovations led to down the road. So Patrick, I'll give you the last word, and to all of our friends out there listening to this, we'll see you in Miami in July. Please check our website, www.aspenpain.com. We'll see you in London in October at our ISPN meeting, our kickoff to our follow-up from our Dubai meeting. So, Patrick, final word.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Again, it's been a pleasure hosting this podcast with you. We've had so many amazing guests like Usman on this, and what a way to wrap this up. Looking forward to next season. We're going to be starting up back in March. So like I said, if you want to sponsor the season, go to the website. If you want me to guest, let Tim and I know, and we'll be happy to have you on. So thank you so much, Usman, for coming on again. This wraps up episode 10, season 2 of the Pain Unfiltered podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.